I want to talk about the Celtics because that's the big thing for me. Uh, the Celtics, 15 and 17, 2 games behind 500, and this team they're in ninth place, not even in the playoff picture, behind by half a game. Something is not working there. Now you hear the question: is it Brad Stevens? Does he need to be on the hot seat? And a lot of Boston fans are saying he needs to be fired. A lot of experts are saying he needs to be fired. Danny Ainge, people are blaming Danny Ainge. People are blaming No one's blaming Jason Tatum, and I don't blame them because he's averaging the most points he's ever averaged in his career. His assist numbers are up. He's balling. Jalen Brown is an all-star. He's been balling, especially when Tatum was out, and so it's not obviously not them. I think Kemba Walker is kind of a big bad play this year. He's been injured. Marcus Smart's been hurt. Kemba Walker needs to be better. Okay, I don't. If it's for the injury, I excuse it. But he just needs to. If he's hurt, he should rest so we can get back to full. Even with him full, I do not see this team coming out of the East. I would trade Kemba Walker for a big man. Brad Stevens has proven year in and year out he is the best, youngest, not young, one of the youngest, most talented coaches in the league. Obviously, a basketball genius, X's and O's guy. Love that. Boston. We'll see what he does with Isaiah Thomas, with Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown. Danny Ainge has been a fantastic executive. Some questionable moves. He passed up on James Harden earlier in the year for Jalen Brown and Marcus Smart. And I can understand that because obviously your team went to the Eastern Conference Finals last year. And amid the time of the Harden trade, people were questioning how good of a locker room presence he is, when obviously he's proved that he is not a cancer, like most people were saying. But yeah, Jalen Brown's a great player. He's an all-star, and Marcus Smart's the most valuable player, one of the most valuable players to this Boston team, and him being out does hurt the team. However, I think they need a big man. They struggled last year. The reason they lost to the Heat in the playoffs was because they did not have a big man. Bam Adebayo just had his way with Daniel Tice and Robert Williams, and Robert Williams has been great. I think trading Kemba Walker for Andre Drummond, who's sitting out now, the Cavs are keeping him um, out of their rotation until they either trade or buy him out. If they buy him out, I think he was interested in Brooklyn, the Celtics, obviously some other places. I think both the Brooklyn Nets and the Boston Celtics could use him, especially, well, both of them could. But the Celtics in being specific with the Celtics, if they trade Kemba, or better, just sign Andre Drummond if he gets bought out. If they trade Kemba for any compatible big man in the offense who Brad Stevens can use to rebound. They fell apart last year in the playoffs against the Heat because they got out rebounded. And what did they do in the offseason? They picked up Tristan Thompson, who's aging and regressing. And we've seen he hasn't been bad this year, but he is not what the Celtics needed. He would be reliable off the bench behind a better big man. I think trading Kemba also opens up way more opportunities in the starting lineup. For you could have Marcus Smart run the one, Brown and Tatum at the 2 and 3, Robert Williams at the 4, and then the big man you get at the 5. You could have Pritchard and Smart in the backcourt, or I don't really like Teague in the starting lineup. I think Pritchard's better, younger. I think Pritchard and Smart. You could have Tatum at the 4, Brown at the 3, and then the big man. I think there's just so many more things you could do and be such a complete team. I think if they get a big man, with or without Kemba Walker, this team is going to be right there with the Nets in the Eastern Conference Finals if they don't play them before. I think if they play Philly, I think it's a 4 or 5 game win for the Celtics, even if they don't have a big man, because we saw last year the same thing. I think there's no doubt the Celtics are making the playoffs, because obviously this is just a little mud slide in the mud for them. 3-7 in their last 10 games, 3 straight losses. But I'm taking the Celtics any day over the Sixers. Sixers just cannot handle the Boston Celtics. But the Nets are coming out of the East as far as I'm concerned, unless the Celtics can pick up Andre Drummond or another big man and swipe him from the Nets. If the Nets get a big man like Andre Drummond, then it's completely over. But I am still taking even if the Celtics get a big, I think it could be a 6-game series with the Nets. But I'm taking the Nets because they're obviously my favorite to win the championship. They have been since the Harden trade, and they've proved that point even further. I'm taking the Nets out of the East still, but Brad Stevens being on the hot seat is utterly ridiculous. Danny Ainge, the Paul Pierce trade was questioned in its time. People were saying, how can you trade Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett for that? And that turned out to be young guys, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. They turned the first pick into Jason Tatum and another pick from from Philadelphia. He's just been a fantastic GM. Isaiah Thomas for Kyrie Irving. Obviously, Isaiah Thomas was great. Boston hero. And even though Kyrie Irving didn't work out, Isaiah Thomas has never been the same. He's been hurt. His Kyrie Irving was way better. And I think that there were just too many issues. Kyrie Irving, if he was on this team right now over Kemba Walker, then the Celtics would be winning the championship because Kyrie wouldn't be on the Nets. The Celtics would be winning the championship. I think if the Nets come out of the East, then they will win the championship unless Anthony Davis is fully 100% healthy. But even then, I'm probably still taking the Nets. We'll have to see at the time. If the Celtics somehow come out of the East, I don't think the Sixers are coming out of the East. But if the Celtics lose to anyone other than the Nets, then their season is a fail. Because we can expect them to lose to the Nets, but anyone else, I would expect them to lose to the Celtics personally. A lot of people wouldn't, but if the not the Nets come out, if the Celtics or the Sixers come out of the East, I think the Lakers will have the edge. Celtics are just very young. I think their time will be maybe next year, but I think give them a year or two, and they will be in the championship, especially with Harden and Durant getting older. Kyrie Irving's going to reach 30 pretty soon. So I think the Nets will have 1 or 2 years of dominance, and then they will age, try and rebuild. But that trade, anyone who says that Harden trade was not worth it is obviously wrong. I said it in the time. They're trading their future, which is a long shot to be a championship team with all those draft picks, for a ring or two right now. And that's a great trade. And I said it at the time. But the Nets are obviously balling. Celtics not balling, but they will turn it around. I think they can get the 5 seed. I think they might be able to get the 4 seed. Only 2 games back from the 4, or 1 game back from the 4 seed. It's just there's so many teams in that contention right now. It's Sixers with 22 wins, Nets with 22 wins, Bucks with 20 wins, and then there's a drop off 3.5 games back. Pacers 15 wins. They're 15-15. The Celtics are in 9th, 15-17. 2 more games played. So the Celtics could get the 4 seed easily, and I think that they will. Which would mean that they're playing, I don't know, the Raptors, the Knicks in the first round, which will be a win for the Celtics, who will then go on to face, if the Sixers are in first or the Nets are in first, they'll play one of those two. I don't think the Bucks will finish in first. If it's the Nets, then that's the real challenge. There's the best series in the Eastern Conference, and I think the Nets have the advantage at the moment. If it's the Sixers, then the Celtics will win that too, and then play the Nets. But they're going to have to face off against the Nets, and the Nets won't lose to anybody. The only team that might contend with them is the Celtics if they get a big man, or the Lakers if Anthony Davis is healthy. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say about Brad Stevens. He's a genius. He should be the head coach for Boston for at least 20 years. And my early prediction for next year is that Jason Tatum is going to be the MVP. Boston Celtics are going to win 56 games and be the 1 seed in the East and compete for a championship if the Nets aren't still balling like they are right now. But Jason Tatum, I think he's going to be an MVP next year if it's not Luka Doncic, because I think he's the only competition for him next year. If LeBron gets one this year, no matter how he does next year, they won't give it to him. They just, for whatever reason, they don't like repeating too many times the MVP, because other than if it wasn't like that. Tom Brady and LeBron James would win the MVPs every year. But I think Tatum's an early candidate for the next year's MVP. I think he'll average on 28, 9, and 5.